Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you guys so much for being here. We do have a really great show for you. We're going to be doing quite a bit of debunking. We're going to slay some narratives, debunk some rumors. We're going to start off with the revised UN numbers. Many are saying that the UN has cut their numbers in half. We're going to share with you exactly the details of the numbers that were shared, the numbers that they revised, and also what the UN has to say about it for themselves. We're going to hear from the horse's mouth and debunk some of those rumors that have been circulating around mostly right-wing media, pro-Israel media, saying, oh, see, you can't trust the numbers. The UN cut them in half. It's not as bad as it says. There is no genocide. Just one of those little nuggets that they're trying to use in order to justify the massacres that are happening in Gaza. We're also going to slay some narratives about Jerry Seinfeld and the commencement speech that he gave at Duke University, where many students walked out. Many are saying, oh, they're just anti-Semites. They didn't want the Jew speaking. And see, they saw a Jew, they got up and they left. And they're all a bunch of Jew-hating anti-Semites. That's not true. There's been some video circulating now that has surfaced of Jerry Seinfeld training with the IDF, and the training allowing him to do these simulated bombings of residential buildings that would kill women and children. So he's actually quite extreme, and we're going to show some of the evidence of that, as well as, they're always saying that, oh, the college protests, these are peaceful protesters. I'm sorry, that they're violent protesters. They're saying they're violent protesters. They're not peaceful protesters, and that the Israelis and the pro-Zionists are actually the peaceful ones. Well, there has been some reports of a Zionist activist who ran a car into the group of Palestinian protesters. There's a lot of video of very violent protesters that were going after the peaceful protesters that were funded by Jerry Seinfeld's wife. So we're going to get into that tonight as well. Also, we're going to be joined by Dr. Kirk Moore. We had him on the show about a little over a year ago, when he was indicted for issuing vaccine cards to people he allegedly did not give the vaccine to. There have been some updates to his case, some really shocking things the government is trying to do, trying to censor. They're actually trying to censor the courts, and it's really, really alarming and really shocking. So we're going to get the updated story from Dr. Kirk Moore. What is happening to him? What is he facing? He's facing 15 years in jail. They've already thrown him in jail since we last spoke to him. We'll hear the rest of his story, and it is pretty shocking. But first, today is Israel's Independence Day, marking the birth of the nation of Israel. At the same time, it is Nakba Day, the remembrance of the Palestinian people, of what that birth of Israel meant for them. That meant massacres, it meant rapes, it meant theft, looting. It was a violent day, and 750,000 Palestinians, about 80% of the population in what would become the state of Israel, were expelled, and expelled violently. Now, the narrative around this is disputed. Many Israelis say they were not expelled. They fled on their own at the behest of Arab nations around them, who told them and encouraged them to flee the land. We didn't expel them. It had nothing to do with us. Palestinians, on the other hand, say, yeah, well, we were partially told and expelled. The reason why we were told and fled, even if voluntarily, was because our homes were being burnt down, our women were being raped, we were being massacred, there was massive violence. We had no other option but to either be expelled by you or to flee voluntarily out of fear of our own lives. Just give you a little bit of background of the Nakba. Like I said, 750,000 Palestinians, 80% of the population, were expelled or fled and later became refugees. 11 Arab urban neighborhoods and over 500 villages were destroyed or depopulated. Thousands of Palestinians were killed in dozens of massacres. About a dozen rapes of Palestinians by regular and irregular Israeli military forces have been documented, but more are suspected. So there was mass rape during that time. Israelis used psychological warfare tactics to frighten the Palestinians into fleeing. So they did targeted violence, they did whispering campaigns, they did radio broadcasts, loudspeaker vans, they looted. There was a lot of looting done by Israeli soldiers. Civilians inside of Palestinian homes were, they were looted, they were killed. Businesses, farms, artwork, books, and archives, all of that looted, destroyed. It was all widespread. So for the Palestinian people, Today marks a very sad day in their history where they lost their land, which is the most precious thing a person can have, a people can have is their land. The Palestinians were living on this land for thousands of years, even, and then cropped up this Zionist project of wanting to create not just allowing and encouraging Jews to return to the land of Israel, which I think many of us think would have been okay. Um, to a degree. I mean, really, any sort of government or people should be allowed to control their immigration. And so the Palestinians who were living on the land at the time it was the British mandate. The British actually they started limiting the immigration of Jews back into the Holy Land, or not even back into the Holy Land. Some of them were never, many of them were not even from there. But into the Holy Land, they realized, the local population isn't so thrilled about this. It's like what we're seeing in Texas, right? The Texans, they're not so thrilled about all these Mexicans that are coming through over the border. The federal government is kind of like, well, we'll do what we want to do. Yeah, we'll kind of stop it. We won't. Texas is fighting that. Texas wants to prosecute the people on their own. They want to arrest. They want to handle their own border, even though the border is supposed to be managed by the federal government. So it's very similar. You have the Palestinian people who are not technically in charge, just like the Texas border. It's the federal government that's technically in charge. But the British, they were like, the Arabs are not so thrilled about all of these Jews from Europe flooding into the place. So maybe we should put a limit on the immigration. Well, the Jewish Zionists at that point were hardcore. And they committed numerous acts of terrorism, well-documented acts of terrorism against the British in order to get them to change their policies on immigration into the land. But I think many of us feel like, look, had the Arabs, the reason why the Arabs were upset about it was because they heard what these Jewish Zionist settlers were saying. They heard them say, we want to create a Jewish homeland here for Jews only, and not for these Arabs. They heard this. They didn't like that. Imagine if these immigrants flooding in over the Texas border said, we want Mexico, we want Texas back. We want it to be Mexico. Texas should be Mexico. We're going to take over. We're going to flood the place with us. And then we're going to take over the place by voting or civil war, whatever we got to do. We're going to take it back and make Texas Mexico again. The Texas natives would not be very thrilled about that, and probably there would be some acts of violence, there would be some uprisings and whatnot. So the Arab population heard of these projects, the talking at the meetings that they were having, and they were pretty upset about it. So the British tried to limit it, but then there were the Zionists. They ended up committing a lot of acts of terrorism. Ultimately, then when World War I, there was a lot of, World War II, there was a lot of decision making on who would side with who, because especially in that region, there was at times when the Jewish Zionists went to Hitler and said, we'll side with you, or we want the British to do what we want. You're against the British. We're against the British. Your enemy is my enemy. So you and I we're good. There was times when the Arabs went to Hitler and said, hey, you got a problem with Jews? We got a problem with Jews. So you and I, your enemy and our enemy is the same. So they both kind of had similar enemies with Hitler. There were times that both of them tried to then partner with the British, hoping that the British would change their mind on the region. The Arabs, of course, wanted to pressure the British into changing their policy on the land and allowing all of this Jewish immigration from Europe. Obviously, the Jewish settlers there, the Zionists, they wanted to get in with the British because they wanted the British to allow for immigration. So they said, hey, if we side with you, will you help us out? Will you change your policy? So there was a lot of negotiating on that side, in that side of the world. But fundamentally, I don't think any American would have been okay with a flood of immigrants coming in with the explicit intent stated in meetings, in documents, in flyers, that they were going to take over. And that you, the non-native, the non-Mexican in Texas, without Mexican heritage, could not stay. That you needed to go. There are 49 other states you can go to, we just want one. Could you imagine this sort of narrative coming from the Mexican nationalists, the Texicans who want to take it back from Mexico? Could you imagine them saying, you have 49 other places to go. You just go there. We just want this one. We just want Texas. That's our native homeland. We want it back for us. What is your problem? What is your issue? Could you imagine this? So the Nakba was a very devastating day. Even if the Arab nation said you guys should flee, even if they did it voluntarily, that does not mean that it was okay then for the Zionists to take over and continue, and say, well, it was their fault. They fled on their own. My family fled Vietnam at the behest of the United States. Does that mean that my Vietnamese family should not be allowed to return to Vietnam? Is that what that would mean? Like, well, you left voluntarily. Nobody expelled you, even though there was a war, and we maybe would have put you in jail or killed you had you not fled. It's just the insanity around the narrative. But I want to show you some of the stuff that's going on, how the Israelis, how Rabbi Shmuley is celebrating, how they're setting fire to aid trucks that are headed into Gaza. This is how the Israeli Zionists, the ultra Zionists, or even American Zionists are celebrating Independence Day. Watch this. Here's Shmuley dancing. This was in New York City. The Zionist Organization of America held a rally last night in New York City. This is just some taste of what it was like. Put your hands up. So put your hands up. This is New York City. Hey, listen, I'm just glad I don't see RFK Jr. there. Here's Rabbi Shmuley now chanting IDF, IDF. He's leading the crowd in chanting this. IDF, 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 IDF. Can you believe that? IDF, IDF. Okay, then here is some Israelis actually, let me show you the tweet that goes with this, because this comes from Alon Lee Green, who's the activist that we have been sharing a lot of his stuff, because he's been doing some really great work in Israel. He's an Israeli activist for freedom for all, human rights for all, and he documented this. This is what he says in his tweet. We translated it, well, Google translated it. And at night, on the eve of Independence Day, they set fire to the trucks, the flour, and the food. A bunch of criminals, of settlers, of lawbreakers who are not afraid of the law, who openly commit a hate crime in broad daylight in front of the police, who simply stared at them and let them continue. Agents of death, and above all, a reflection of what we have become. So poor Alon Lee Green, just trying to talk sense into his fellow Israelis and the crimes that they commit. This is what he shared then on social media. Look at this. They've set fire. We showed you yesterday them looting the Israelis. There was a bunch of right-wing radical settlers that were grabbing the flour, grabbing the food, throwing it off of the aid trucks, the IDF just standing there, nobody doing anything to intervene. And apparently at night, they decided to go a step further and they lit it all on fire. So, and again, Alon Lee Green is saying that the police just stood there and watched. That's what happens with the IDF. That's what happens with the Israelis. They allow the settlers to commit heinous crimes against the Palestinian people with no recourse whatsoever. They stand there, and a lot of times they help them. They're radicals themselves. And the Palestinians, they look at an IDF soldier wrong and they get carted off away, thrown into a military jail where they have no rights. They're not charged with any crimes. They're taken away from their family members for a month or longer. And there's nothing, and they aren't given the same rights. So that is how they're treated. So you see now how the Israelis celebrate their Independence Day, how some of them are celebrating their Independence Day versus, and lighting stuff on fire. Let me share with you. This is Mohammed Hadid. He is the father of Bella and Gigi Hadid, the models who are very famous, who've also been, they've lost job opportunities speaking out on behalf of Palestine. They're Palestinian. They've sacrificed with their careers. Here's Mohammed Hadid sharing his very heartbreaking Nakba story with his family. Let me just go ahead and pull this up.
Hadid, I'm a Nakba survivor. My parents were Nakba survivors. We were happily living in Safad. My parents and their kids at the time, Ghada, Raida, and Sana. I was born in Nazareth, came back home to my home in Safad, returning after my mother had me in her father's home. We were kicked out, locked us out. The people that we took in 2 years prior from the port of Haifa were my father, my uncle, a few other friends of my father, Al-Khoury family, the Sabbagh family, went to pick up some refugees that arrived to Haifa from Poland, that traveled the world and no one will take them. They ended up in our backyard at the port that my great-grandfather rebuilt in the 18th century when he ruled the land of Galilee. We loved them, my mother said. We fed them, we dressed them, we made sure they're safe. When she came back to the gates of our home, they locked us out without allowing us to go in to take a single memory. I was 9 days old. She had to carry me alone with my sister, 1 year older, all the way to Syria. My uncle found my father and my other 2 sisters and my grandmother in a refugee camp out in the desert. Unfortunately, it took him a while to get there, because my uncle was a infectious disease doctor. He brought him back to Syria for us to be with him. My father finally got a job immediately almost at the University of Damascus as an English professor. Then he was transferred to the Voice of America. That's where we ended up here in USA. A lot of unfortunate people kept and stayed behind in refugee camps all over the world, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Syria, in Lebanon. They were unfortunate. We made it safe, and my parents would not allow us to hate anyone. Made us hate the Jews. They said they were distressed and oppressed. They gave them a home. They did not realize they were going to kick them out of our home. My saddest moments, I can say that my mother asked me to promise her a promise that when she dies, to be buried in with her parents in their cemetery in Nazareth, next to her grandfather, great-grandfather, and her sister. I did not do that one single thing. Not that one. Not the one she really wanted at her deathbed. I would never forget that. I would never forget what the Zionists have done to us. They destroyed families, separated them, my mother couldn't come back home. Alive or dead. And this is probably thousands of Palestinians have exactly the same story. And others have worse. We were lucky that my father and thousands of others, thousands educated people have been sucked into the Arab world and Europe as educators, engineers, doctors. No, Palestine was full of educated people. It was a vibrant country. Safed had more than 75,000 people living there. They murdered most of them. Murdered. There were massacres outside Safed and Safed. My parents never let me hate. They said, if you see a person dying, you help them. You don't ask him what religion he is or she is. Just help first. My name is Muhammad Hadid.
So just absolutely heartbreaking story. And there are thousands upon thousands of stories like this from the Nakba. And it's, we all, most countries, I think, upon their founding have atrocious stories of how they were founded or how the area came to be. Many nations have those terrible stories. The issue with Israel is that the story is still going. The story is still happening to people today as we speak. There are children being massacred, probably right this second. Some child has now lost her life because it's still ongoing. This isn't some horrible story from the past 75 years ago that we should just move on, move forward, forget about, try to live peacefully as one, try to be together, like our own Native Americans who had terrible, tragic, horrific stories that they could tell about the founding of this nation, the colonizers that came through. But today's Native Americans are American citizens. They are allowed to travel freely and abundantly throughout the United States. They can vote. They are equals to us. They can either live on their reservations or they could live anywhere they want. They're not having to be shoved behind a wall where a green line that they're not allowed to cross. They're not told that they're only given water 3 days a week or that they're only going to be given electricity 4 hours a day or their children won't receive cookies because sugar is used to make bombs. They're not told that in the Native American communities. Even after all of the wars and atrocities that happened really upon them, now people can hear those horrific stories and say, I'm glad we're past that. It was horrific. It was horrible. My ancestors maybe did that, but I'm here now and I'm not doing that. But the Israelis can't say that. They can't say that. They are doing it. They're doing it. And if they're not the ones holding the guns or dropping the bombs, they're destroying the food or they're in the streets cheering it on and saying that is what they want. They want their homeland and they want to take it from these other people who've been there for centuries and centuries. So it's a terrible day for the Palestinians. It's for the Israelis. It's a day of independence when they were granted their own nation. And it's just it's a day of very mixed emotions for many people in that region right now who are either suffering or celebrating. It's a mixed day full of emotion. The Israelis have banned Arab Palestinians living inside the state of Israel they banned them from recognizing Nakba Day. They're not allowed to do it. So, there's the democracy and freedom and liberal democracy of Israel, but you're not allowed, if you're Palestinian living inside the state of Israel, to recognize the Nakba. It's illegal in their schools. It's illegal for the Palestinian children, the Palestinian Israeli children, to even learn about it in any sort of government setting, like a school or any business. They're not allowed to recognize it. So, hey guys, thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show, which you could catch just by heading to that link down below, KimIversonShow.com. You can watch the full show from what you just watched, or you could catch the full show live Monday through Friday, live streams, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you then. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Never miss an episode. Never miss a clip. Never miss a segment. Thanks, guys.